Hello, my name is Chad. I'm from north central Pennsylvania, Potter County to be exact. And I'm down here in my basement, a man cave if you want to call it that. I'm about to do a quick tour of my basement for all of those who like taxidermy, like to hunt, fish. During this pandemic, I've spent a lot of time on YouTube looking at other people's man caves, and I thought I would do one of my own. I wanted to wait till I got my most recent mounts back, which are a surf scoter and a couple of eiders, which I'll get to. I want to give you a panoramic shot first before I begin the tour. I'm going to start back here behind my bar. Now, most of these animals that you're going to see come from Pennsylvania, north central Pennsylvania actually, with some exceptions, and I'll mention those exceptions as I progress through. I'm starting here with this 9-point. This 9-point is not a buck that I shot. It is instead a couple of sheds that I found at my brother's farm not too far from here. It scores about 143 inches. And I decided to put it on a plaque because it's one of the nicer sets that I found. Below that we have a brown trout. And below that, a smallmouth bass caught in Lake Erie back in '08. The most recent mounts, which were aforementioned, the eiders, are here. Got those back yesterday from the taxidermist. I think they came out awesome. That was a great trip up in Maine on Penobscot Bay last December. That's a male and a female. Over here we have a coot shot up in New York. Beside that, an 8-point buck shot right across from my house back in '15. Beside that is a woodcock. I have not shot many of those, but a few. They're a pretty neat bird. Moving over here, we have a couple more fish. This is a large brown trout, 24 inches long, and a golden rainbow trout, 22 inches long. Moving around, we see here in this wall just some old license plates, a couple of pictures, old Pennsylvania hunting licenses, a terrible towel, Steelers, Penguins, Mary Lemieux, as obviously I'm a big Pittsburgh fan. Here we have my wife's first ever rattlesnake, timber rattlesnake, which is what we have here in Pennsylvania. She caught that back 3-4 years ago. We had the hide tanned. Over here is a rattlesnake that I tagged several years ago. We move in here to the bathroom. There's a couple of mounts in here as well. This is a ringneck pheasant, Pennsylvania stocked bird. We don't have wild ones here anymore in PA, not even in the South. A couple of gray squirrels. I think these are the first 2 mounts I ever got back when I was like 18, 20 years old, a long time ago. This is the back half of an alligator that I harvested in Florida. I'll show you the half mount a little bit, front half. That there is a mule deer that I harvested in Wyoming back in 1986 when I was a senior in high school. My dad took my brother and myself, and a friend of mine, his dad, went along. Awesome trip. Love to go back out there and do it again someday. Down here on this stand we have a ruffed grouse, male in a strutting position. People always say, how can you tell a male from a female grouse? Well, I was always told that in the back here, where I'm pointing, if it's a male, it is a non-stop black or dark brown ring from one end of the tail to the other. And if it's a female, the feather in the middle will be much lighter. So based off of that analysis, I guess we call that a male. A couple of sheds that I found, bigger ones over the years, and the skull of a coyote Over here, my favorite part of the game room would be my duck section, minus the eiders that I previously showed you. Here we've got a couple of buffle heads. Got those, I'm not sure if I was in Maryland or New York when I shot those, but I've shot a lot of buffle heads over the years. Canvas back drake, one of my favorite mounts, one of my favorite birds. That was harvested on the Niagara River quite a few years ago. A couple of scoters, a surf scoter on the bottom, and on the top a common scoter, black scoter, both shot off the coast of New Jersey. And then we have a couple of wood ducks, first ever banded wood duck, as you can see. One of only 2 ducks I've ever shot that were banded. I shot that not far from where I live. That is a local black duck. We don't get a lot of those in Potter County, but we do get a few. Common merganser drake, swimming pose. Here are a couple of old squaws, which today of course are known as longtails. To me, they'll always be old squaws. Shot those on the Niagara River as well. A lesser scaup. And here we have a drake mallard with a wood duck drake. Coming over here, we have a red fox that I harvested a few years ago at my brother's farm, deer farm. But he used to own a deer farm. Deer are all gone now. Now it's just a 300-acre hunting farm. And here's a gray fox. And a couple of mallards. And a mallard that is banded, shot on Seneca Lake in New York. Up here we have my wife's first ever squirrel. Happened to be a black squirrel. And her first ever buck, which would have been an 8, but its main beam's broken off as a 6-point. A couple of doves. Another ruffed grouse, another male, strutting pose. And a melanistic pheasant. Look at the spurs on that thing. Pretty big. Underneath that we have a blue-winged teal. Now this blue-winged teal, if those of you out there are duck hunters, you'll know this is not a fully plumed teal. This was shot in October here in Potter County, and at that time of year, the drakes don't have the white crescent on their face and the bluish-gray head. This was about as nice a bird as I'm going to get for a blue-winged teal, and it is a male. You can tell by the white here on the speculum. Hens don't have that, so I mounted it and it came out pretty nice. This I just got back from the taxidermist yesterday too. This is a surf scoter, shot in Maine. Golden eye that I harvested up in the Niagara River when I got the canvas back. Awesome looking bird. A greater scaup. Now the greater scaup and the lesser scaup differ in that the greater scaup is a larger bird. It's got a greenish tint to its head rather than a purple tint that the lesser has. And the barring on the wing goes all the way across the wing, which you can't see on this particular mount because it's sitting. And beside that is a ruddy duck I shot up in New York in the Finger Lakes as well. These ducks, like the blue-winged teal, don't get their full plumage until late in the year, really late. So it's hard to get one that looks fully plumed, which when they are fully plumed, they have a lot of red on their bodies. Moving over this way, past the television, there's a bobwhite quail. And we have an alligator. This is a trip I took to Florida with my son and my wife. He shot a 7-foot gator, I shot a 7-foot gator. one of those bucket list hunts. Pretty cool, a nice experience. Glad I did it, and that's the result. I almost forgot there's a 6-point there, European mount from 20 years ago or so. A little Jake fan and bear that I did, and I added a couple other turkeys that I've shot on there, the beards, the spurs. Down here we have a Drake wood duck and a Drake black duck, one of my favorite mounts. Came out awesome. This is a common merganser hen diving under the water for a fish. They're pretty hard on the fish. Up here we have a bobcat. I trapped this back in 08 because I wanted a bobcat. It's a female. It weighed 20 pounds, which is a good sized female, a nice female. Males get quite a bit bigger, but for a female she was nicely furred and pretty good sized. Moving over here to the section of the game room where the deer are, most of the deer. These two bucks is an 8-point here and a 6-point here. They were both shot in the early 90s, long before we had antler restrictions in place. And back then these were considered pretty nice bucks. They wouldn't be by today's standards, but they certainly were then. I think we've come a long way in Pennsylvania since that time. Underneath that we have a cottontail rabbit and a snapping turtle shell. And I mentioned my brother's deer farm. He had about 4 or 5 acres fenced in and raised deer. And my father-in-law did too. And this was a fawn that was born alive but died shortly after, and I can't remember which farm it came from, whether it was my brother's or my stepfather's, but either way, we kept it. I froze it and then had it mounted. You have to have all the paperwork for that, which I have in my safe. But that's a pretty interesting talking piece when I have company over. Up here is a 8-point buck. Shot a couple years ago. Up at my brother's place I mentioned before. And first and only black bear I've ever harvested. 132-pound male, not a big male, but hey, a bear's a bear. Had a really nice coat, so I decided to get that done as well. Maybe the only bear I ever shoot. Above that we have a 6-point buck, would have been an 8, but both brow tines were broken off. This is post antler restrictions, a little nicer deer. This is the year of the antler restrictions, I believe, so it hadn't taken effect yet, but that's an 8-point that would have been a nice buck if I'd have waited a couple years to harvest him. Had good genetics. This is a Eastern turkey. I mounted this turkey because he wasn't the biggest turkey I ever shot. He has about an 8-inch beard, maybe 3/4 to an inch long spurs. Got to be a 2-year-old, I would say. The reason I mounted him, even though I've shot bigger birds, is because I hunted him the entire season. I could not kill him. He outsmarted me, and on the last day of the season I was able to harvest this guy, so he's kind of special to me, and that's why I put him on the wall. Underneath the turkey we have a big snake mount. My father-in-law built this for me. I put a rat snake on it with one of my timber rattlesnakes. This was a 50-inch black phase rattler. Big, heavy, thick snake with a bunch of rattles on it. Above that I have another yellow phase rattlesnake that I had mounted, about a 48-incher. And then one of my son's rattlesnakes, 50-inch black phase that he has down here. And the first legal rattlesnake I ever caught was this black phased, and I mounted it as well. Above that we have a picture of this buck here that I harvested in 2014 with my bow. Pretty decent buck, scores about 110 I think, something around like that, 108. Another nice 8-point Potter County buck. I've shot 2 of these. These are snowshoe hares. This is the first one I ever harvested a few years ago. I wasn't even sure there were snowshoe hares up here in this area, north central Pennsylvania, but I was assured by a buddy there was, and he took me out, and sure enough, we found a couple, and this is the first one I harvested. One of my favorite hunts I've ever been on, and one of my favorite mounts as well, because there's just so few of them. Down here is a skunk. I know skunks are smelly, not very pleasant, but I do think they're one of the prettiest animals we have in Pennsylvania. So as a result of that, I decided to have this one mounted, which you can see here. Beside it is the first coyote that I ever shot back in '08. 35-pound male with a squirrel in its mouth. Now this, if you're wondering why the hair is short, this was shot in August before the coat got full, long-haired. Now I shouldn't say full because it is a full coat. It's a nicely coated coyote. It's just not winter hide, but it's a pretty cool looking mount. Moving over here, above my safe is my most recent buck. I shot that last year, 7-point. Scored about 100 inches. And then this is my largest buck ever, about 130-inch 10-point that I shot in the late season in 2017. For those that are from PA, if you remember, 2017 was an extremely cold year. I'm off between Christmas and New Year's being a teacher. So I took that entire week and hunted, even though I never got above 0. It was brutal. But I hung in there, and then on Friday, the 5th day, this guy came out into the field to eat early, and he never left the field. I was able to harvest him. And interestingly enough, the year before, I had found his shed. So that's his shed the year before, down here. That's a fallow deer that my father-in-law had in his deer farm that we got. This buck right here is a huge Pennsylvania deer. It scores just about 160 inches gross. And I did not shoot this buck. I had a local taxidermist that I use, had an extra hide. It was kind of big. I wanted a big form to go with this. These are sheds that I found about 1.5 miles from my house. And they were so big and so cool looking that I decided to mount the deer. It is a 13-point main frame 11 with a kicker off the base of the left tine and a split right tine. Pretty cool looking buck. And then this is a timber rattlesnake my son harvested, his first one ever, yellow phase. 47 or 8 inches long. Autograph picture from Fonzie. For those that are old like me, you recognize him. Penguins stuff. Over here we have a picture of my son holding a snake with his friend. A large shed found here. A couple of black squirrel tails. Another shed. Picture of me and my friend. Hunting down Maryland, I think. And then in here we have just a turkey fan, another turkey fan, spurs. And then here we have a bunch of bucks that I shot when I first started hunting back in 1980, from 80 to about 90 or so, or mid-90s. This is before the antler restrictions, so the bucks here are not in the least bit big, but they're bucks that I shot. They're important to me. They're some of the first deer I ever shot. So as a result, I put them on a plaque, and here they sit in the spare bedroom. And that is pretty much all the animals that I have. Once again, a panoramic shot of the man cave. I don't believe we skipped anything. I do have a personal goal, a couple personal goals. I do want to get a drake of every duck species in North America before I quit hunting. I'm at 15 now. I got 17 more to go, so I'm about halfway. That may or may not happen. It all depends on my money situation. The other goal is to get every huntable species of Pennsylvania game animal mounted. And I'm shy on that too. I don't have a raccoon, I don't have a porcupine, fox, squirrel, a few other things. But I'm doing better on that than I am on the duck goal. But once again, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And I am out.